Hi everyone, welcome back to The Feel Between. I'm Yasmin.
I'm Ahmed.
And we're happy to be with you. Today we're going to be reviewing a show called Muawiya. We watched just the first episode. Before that, any life updates, Ahmed? How are you feeling?
Good. Let's see. I baked some good bread recently.
Very good. Excellent.
I find that letting it auto-lease for 2 hours, or the dough auto-lease for 2 hours before adding in the starter.
What's the term?
Auto-lease?
What does that mean?
Autolyze? What is it's probably pronounced autolyze. It's essentially just mixing in the flour and water and letting that sit there for like a couple of hours. Some people do it for an hour. Some people do it for 6 hours. But I think it just lets the natural yeasts in the flour get going. And then you add in the starter, and then I think it's just like a better environment for the fermentation.
You created like a nice party.
But the last couple of loaves that I baked have just had a lot of flavor.
Yeah, no, they've been great. We should put this next one in the freezer too, so we have more of like a stash. I love when we have that.
Well, I think we're taking it to the iftar tonight.
Oh, perfect. We should cut it up then.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the bread has been great.
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning the John Fetterman stuff. So earlier this week, he got a little silver pager from Benjamin Netanyahu. I think in times like that, it's just like worth asking the simple questions of why is Benjamin Netanyahu giving John Fetterman a trophy? And also like a trophy that symbolizes or pays homage to a terrorist attack, right? It's like if someone from the Saudi royal family, or if Osama bin Laden was just like I don't know. This is not at all comparable, but this like would piss off Zionists in the same way that people should be pissed off about this. But it's like if someone gave Ilhan Omar, like a little statue figurine of the Twin Towers or something. You know what I'm saying? It's just like an insane thing to do.
That sounds like something, unfortunately, someone might do in this moment.
Yeah, someone would do that in a way that is like, you did this or whatever. But
it just shows the continued disposability of Arab life, and especially Arab children's lives. Like a lot of kids were killed in that attack, and yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really disgusting thing. He's just kind of like an ogre of a man.
He's our local representative, by the way. So
he's our state senator.
Our state senator. Yeah, we unfortunately are particularly tied to him.
Yeah, rumor has it he'll be in Pittsburgh later this week. So hope people do something with that.
Yeah.
I know I'll be trying to figure out where he is.
Yeah, people need to listen to their constituents. They really should be held accountable. There should be mandatory meetings, honestly, with your senator. It's crazy how much they can like hide from the public.
I feel like there should be a mechanism built in to these offices whereby your constituents can summon you.
Or recall you, even if popular sentiment has like deeply turned against you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's a little trickier, especially with senators, because that's statewide, but certainly with your, representative. But even for senators, I feel like there should be a way that, if a city the size of Pittsburgh is like, hey, this guy is doing some stuff we don't really like, there should be an accountability mechanism, because, I mean, Senate terms are 6 years, so it's like, this guy's been in, a year and a half before he started really pissing people off, and like people started regretting that they voted for him.
How long has it been now?
I think he's like probably like 2.5 years into his term. So we
still have a while left, unfortunately.
Yeah. He's not going to be up he doesn't have to start campaigning again until I think like 2028. Yeah.
Yeah. There are too many updates on the home front. I think I'll save that for another episode, but things continue to devolve with higher ed. And I think the only really major update worth giving, which I'm sure everyone's aware of at this point, is that the full scale of the genocide has resumed in Gaza. which is really heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll do an episode dedicated to that coming up soon. I don't know if I have any other updates.
Other more personal updates. I think I mentioned this last episode, but this has been such a community-filled Ramadan, which again I'm really grateful for in a time that is like so tumultuous. Yeah, we've been going to a lot of iftars. We've been meeting a lot more Muslims here, and so that's been really nice to feel like rooted in community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going through my camera roll to see if I captured anything.
Yeah, that's a cute way to remind yourself.
For us.
Like
we did go for a walk recently. Remember? We went for a walk.
No, where's this going?
From here to Oakland. And back when I met you on campus that one day, and we walked back home together. And we came across this sign on a building that seems to be some sort of school or nonprofit or something like that. And it has 4 little kids. It's like a children's daycare thing. Do you remember this?
Yes.
It has 4 little kids, all diverse. This is something that needs to be investigated by the Trump administration, because this is too much DEI.
Too much.
There is a black kid with a sign above him that says, these are all like cartoon things. It says, bienvenue. So it's welcome in, I guess, Spanish. No, that's bienvenido. I don't know what bienvenido
French?
is. I don't know.
French?
That maybe. Is that French?
Yeah.
Okay, you're the French expert. I don't know.
I'm not a French expert. But it is in French.
There's a tan girl with curly hair in a wheelchair. And in Arabic it says, Marhaba bikum.
Mm-hmm.
There's a white nerdy kid with glasses. It says bienvenido, which is the Spanish. And then there's the English one, and it's a hijabi. And it says welcome in English.
I love that, because like people speak all different languages of all different racial and ethnic backgrounds. So it's really nice.
I'm turning them into the Trump administration. I think there's
local daycare.
Probably some cash reward to be had here.
There probably is.
Let's see. That's the only thing on my camera roll of recently, other than bread and
you've been writing your
news
screenplay
clippings
still.
from John Fetterman.
I've been still working on my article. Kind of just status quo. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into it then. Yeah, this new show is produced by Saudi, and it's about the historical figure Muawiya, and he and his family are controversial figures, especially in the history of Sunni and Shia sectarian relations.
Sectarian.
This is one of these words I always say wrong.
Sectarian.
I've got a couple words like this that only Ahmed notices, and like my immediate family. Maybe other people notice, but I don't think they hear me speak enough. Anyway, so Sunnis are...
They're not listening like I am.
They're not. That's true. You're a good listener. Sunnis are the majority group globally, if you're not aware, and Shias are comparatively a minority Muslim group.
Now, we are having that same relation here in this house, right?
No, I don't identify. I identify as a non-denominational Muslim.
So then I would say that I've won in that case.
I don't identify as Sunni.
I know, but I've erased your Shia identity from this house.
My family is Shia, and so it means something to me, especially because there's been quite a bit, unfortunately, of like anti-Shia persecution in Pakistan.
And in this house.
I wouldn't go that far to this house.
I'm kidding. I think it's important to know that actually you and I were just on the same page, that we were just like, I don't feel strongly compelled to identify either way.
Yeah, I was going to say I became more practicing in college, and I happened to be in a community, like more practicing than I was growing up, and I happened to be like in a Sunni majority community. So I feel like I just adopted a lot of what I learned about Islam just was, from like a Sunni lens.
Yeah.
Despite my family's background.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are certain things that like mean a lot to, I think, both of us, like the story of Karbala, that like I feel a special connection to. But I also know that I think there's like a spectrum anyway in both those groups. So, and I study a lot of diverse Muslim theological groups. So I that's one thing I really like, is like intra diversity. I'm really interested in that, and I don't find that like less sacred,
Yeah, preach.
I think we're both also like Sufi curious, Sufi light. I would say that.
You would say that?
I would say we're Sufi light. Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, a lot of things that we find
okay.
meaningful are Sufi or Sufi influenced, but we're not like part of a formal order, or like we're not doing any of the deep stuff, I guess, or like the kind of more.
Well, we're starting our own order.
Oh yeah. The Order of Caravanserai.
That's what it's kind of.
That's cute.
I think it's going in that direction.
Are you going to be our sheikh? Is that's a lot of.
I'm trying to do like a cult.
So you're the sheikh
thing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it gives you like the valence of like a spiritual thing, but it's really about money.
I would say you're pretty anti-capitalist, so I don't think that's going to work out too well.
That's how it starts.
That's how it starts? Yeah. No, you're that to your core, mashallah. I don't think... I would believe something else, but not that. So Muawiya was the first Umayyad caliph, so just the first king of the Umayyad Empire. He ruled from 661 until 680. The show was produced by a Saudi-owned company. It cost around $75 million to film. Is that normal? I don't really know. Like, is that a lot?
It's pretty high budget.
Pretty high budget.
So
okay.
This is, I don't know how many episodes they filmed.
30. It's for every day of Ramadan.
So it's 30 episods.
I think that this is the longest one, though. This is 45. We just watched the first one. I think the rest are more like half an hour.
So you're spending about, a little over $3 million per episode.
$3 million per episode. Wow, yeah.
Which is, it's a good amount,
Where I don't have like a frame of reference. Like, where does that rank with other? Is that like
so? I think
high
like
production?
The most expensive TV show to date, if I had to guess, is probably like The Rings of Power on Amazon.
I remember that was like an atrocious amount of money.
They spent, it's like 10 episodes, and it was a little over $1 billion. So it's like $100 million an episode average. Yeah, I don't know. I'd say it's probably average or below average, but it's like a good production, and it's
not cheap production. Yeah.
Is that 100 million USD?
Yeah.
In dollars?
Yeah.
Interesting. And production's probably cheaper over there. Where they
filmed it. They filmed it in Tunisia, which is probably pretty cheap.
I would imagine that's pretty cheap. And then, but yeah, I think it was like a Palestinian American writer or director.
It's I think an Egyptian. One of them was Egyptian, one of them was Palestinian American. I can't remember who was who. The director and the writer.
Written by an Egyptian,
but financed by Saudi fully.
Financed by Saudi.
Yeah.
Directed by a Palestinian American, I think.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it generated a lot of controversy. So it was banned in Iran. It was deemed to be too blasphemous. It was banned in Iraq for fears that it was going to stoke like sectarian violence.
Yes, the secretaries are all.
They were going to revolt in Iraq.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't banned wholesale in Egypt, but Al-Azhar, which is like the preeminent Sunni Islamic law kind of institution that holds a lot of weight, though it's non-binding, issued a fatwa saying that the show is morally bad because it dramatizes disputes over Islamic leadership and it could like lead people astray. So it's interesting because it's a pretty diverse group of people who don't like this show. You have like a Shia theocracy, Iran. Mm-hmm. You have a place that is very mixed, Iraq, that has Shias and Sunnis. Mm-hmm. And then you have Egypt, which is Sunni majority. But even like the Sunni majority Islamic law representative is saying like, this is bad.
Watch out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was intrigued by the intrigue and all the talk about it.
But has anyone, have any of those warnings been substantively about the show, or is it about fears of what the show may represent?
Both, I think. Both. Yeah.
So they have said that the story itself is in some way blasphemous, or the depictions are blasphemous, or this is like haram on a spiritual level.
Right. There's kind of two different critiques, like as you're alluding to. One is like, should we be dramatizing the lives of the companions of the Prophet, or like this generation? And especially, should we be dramatizing kind of like dirty historical laundry, like figures who were controversial or time periods that were controversial? And then the other critique is like the story is being mistold from like a skewed lens.
I see.
And I'll give a little historical overview before we like delve into our thoughts and opinions of the show, just for context for listeners. But I'll just do like a quick timeline. So the Prophet Muhammad was born in the year 570 of the Common Era. And then he received revelation, which was the Quran, starting in 610. in 622, the early Muslim community went from Mecca, where the Prophet was born and lived his life, to Medina. And then in 630, there was a triumphant return to Mecca, and like everyone converted to Islam. And after the Prophet's death, there was a debate over who should lead the Muslim community. Some thought that it should be Ali, who was the Prophet's son-in-law and his cousin, and others thought it should be Abu Bakr, who was his close companion and his father-in-law. And a lot of people trace this debate to the Sunni-Shia conflict or schism, but it wasn't as if at that moment in time you had people that were using those terms. It was kind of like the beginnings of what would later become a more defined rift, like almost a few centuries later. The first guy ended up being Abu Bakr, and then there were 4 caliphs that are called the Rashidun, so the rightly guided. The last of them ended up being Ali, the other guy who was a contender. And then after the Rashidun, so these 4 caliphs or 4 leaders who all really like knew the Prophet and were trying to kind of, they weren't prophets. Like the Prophet was the last prophet from an Islamic perspective, but they were trying to kind of like rule, having had the benefit of like knowing him personally, which is why Sunnis refer to them as rightly guided. The next empire was the Umayyads, and the first guy who led that empire was the guy who's like our protagonist in the show, Muawiya. And the Umayyads are generally kind of characterized as losing that interest in, not as if they were like not religious, but that they were more interested in statecraft. Like that it kind of was a turn where they were like, we're going to expand and we're going to conquer, kind of for conquering's sake a little bit, is often the characterization. For example, like they moved the capital, which had been in Medina, and then for a hot second in Kufa, they moved it to Damascus because it was like a more established city, and they took over former Byzantine territory. And the Umayyads are also characterized for, like the Rashidun were super messy and there's a lot of infighting, but it was not hereditary rule, which is definitely like what is common across the globe in this time period. And the Umayyads brought back hereditary rule, like, so it was going from like father to son, father to son. They kind of flavored their clan. They were still from the Prophet's tribe, but they were like from the Umayyad clan. And the reason that Muawiya, who is, you know, the namesake of this episode, is controversial is, one, he was a late joiner to Islam. Though, as we'll talk about, the episode makes it seem as if it was kind of always tugging at his heart, which is, I don't know. I mean, it's a fair interpretation. I don't think it's a way we can totally know that.
Right.
But I mean, he only joined it when like the Muslims were ascendant, and essentially there was no other choice. And it was kind of like join in order to be part of this movement that is growing and taking over the area, you know? And then also he's controversial because after the Prophet's death, he led an army to oppose Ali from becoming the 4th caliph, which was like kind of a heartbreaking thing because it was these 2 people that were close to the Prophet. I mean, Ali was a lot closer to the Prophet than Muawiya. Muawiya was much younger when the Prophet was alive, and then Muawiyah's son, and I guess this is not like Muawiyah's own sin, and so I don't think that the show will cover this, but famously Muawiyah's son Yazid is the one that slaughtered the Prophet's grandchild Hussein. And that's the Battle of Karbala that really like forms a lot of Shia identity. So generally, Shias just hate the Umayyads like with a burning passion because they see them as just being traitors and killing the Prophet's family. But it's not as if Muawiyah, he didn't directly kill the Prophet's family, his son did. But
yeah.
So yeah, the first episode is just showing Muawiyah's childhood, his birth. Like it begins literally with him being born, which is cute, kind of like an old school biopic.
Yeah.
Through the like kind of his teenage years and then the Muslim conquest of Mecca. And at the very end of this episode, so we've only watched the first one, he's like doing wudu, he's like washing up before prayer and he's praying. And so we get the idea that he's finally converted. And it's like as the Muslims are coming back into Mecca.
At the end of episode 1.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts?
Which is all we could watch because we couldn't get the login to work for this.
We'll get there though.
Arabic TV
yeah,
service.
episode 1 was free.
Yeah, episode 1 was the only free one that we could watch.
I want to watch more though, so I'll definitely figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see, what did we think?
Yeah,
My initial frustration began when the service that you stream it from somehow has blocked you from being able to cast it to your television.
Okay, this is not a critique of the show though.
This is all part and parcel of the experience.
Okay.
Is that we could only really watch it on a laptop screen, and I'd really been expecting to be able to watch it on a TV.
Okay, point off. Yeah.
That was annoying. I thought some of the sets were really well done, very beautiful.
But then some were totally
production
like
value's
obviously CGI, so it was an awkward contrast. Because I agree, some were really nice.
I mean, for crowds and stuff, this is where it's probably like why they were able to do it for 3 million an episode instead of more. But yeah, scenes where there are big crowds, you can tell that they kind of have computer generated them from far away. They do these like establishing shots and stuff like that
but I'm not like someone who knows a lot about film, so I feel like it must have been a little bit badly done if I noticed, because I don't normally notice stuff like that.
It's not great. Yeah, it doesn't look good.
Yeah,
it doesn't.
I think it's especially like you're saying, a harsh contrast with like the scenes that were really clearly like physical sets that looked really nice.
Yeah. Trying to think of what else. This is not a story that I know very like well at all. So I think it's interesting in that regard. And let's see, I'm trying to think of like how they set it up as like a made for TV story. I felt a little bit confusing at the end because he ages very quickly.
Yeah, he does.
in the first episode, like it skips a lot of time, but it doesn't really show. I thought it would show it'd be a little bit more about him being resistant to being like becoming Muslim.
Well, I feel like the point of view of the show seems to be that a part of him was always drawn to Islam.
But even then, like I thought that would stretch out over several episodes.
Right. He kind of like quickly is won over.
I could be totally wrong, but is there a story that people tell about how like he like was prepared to go to battle against the Prophet, and then like wanted to like reclaim land or something, and then the Prophet like gave him a bunch of land and a bunch of livestock or whatever, and he was just kind of like floored by the
I'm not sure.
generosity.
I do know that like his father Abu Sufyan was like kind of made a leader as a kind of peace treaty once the Muslims did take over Mecca. Like when they finally did conquer or not reconquer, but come back to Mecca and conquer it, they did try like make an amends. It wasn't like a display of force in the sense of like, it was kind of like using local leadership and stuff. I think that story applies to a lot of people that were in Mecca, but there might be a specific one that I'm not thinking of.
Okay. Yeah, I felt like the first episode was very quick. I some notes, but
I agree with like I think Muawiya is an interesting person to choose. I mean, I guess I was because of the controversy, I was more thinking because of like the Umayyads and stuff. But it is kind of interesting to pick someone just from this vantage point of the first episode who like wasn't with the Prophet. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of interesting to think about the people who didn't join the movement in the beginning, and like what that looked like to see it advance as you were staying in Mecca. It's sort of interesting. I never really thought about that because usually when you read like biographies of the Prophet or even of the companions, they're following the Prophet, you know. And it kind of captures a little bit, I guess, the tension with new social movements and the question of like when to join something, you know, and I mean, even like, I didn't know this, but I guess like his sister joined much earlier, and the tensions that can create within a family. There's some themes there that I think are like pretty relevant to a lot of time periods and contexts. That was interesting.
Yeah. I wonder how much review and editorial scrutiny the script underwent just being funded by Saudi. Do you know anything about that?
I mean, from who? What do you mean? I mean, if it didn't get a sign of approval from Azhar, then we're not that worried, I guess, about like having sign-offs. Not
sign-offs, but is this like presenting like a hegemonic narrative that kind of, I guess, elides some differences, or
I think that's a criticism that it makes it seem as if Muawiya always wanted to be Muslim, when it's like I don't think that's like necessarily totally fabricated, but I don't know if I think it's like a choice to view the historical record that way. It's not something that we like know, you know. I mean, that's the thing with like historical fiction. We don't know people's inner intentions, right? So then that's when you get into the fiction aspect, is like this idea that he was always drawn to it.
But is this like some of those movies that, you know, the Ben Shapiro network produces about Christianity? You know what I'm saying? Like, is this like equivalent of that?
That's the thing. I mean, I feel like Saudi is trying to get into the cultural space. Like I feel like they are interested in like Dubai and how Dubai has become kind of known for the arts, albeit a very corporatized, very kind of flashy Vegas version of it. And now Saudi is trying to kind of like flex its influence a little bit. And I do think it's an interesting moral question. Like I found the show entertaining, you know, but like, and I think I'm going to show parts of it to my students in my intro to Islam class because I think it's fun to like analyze as a primary source. But it does feel like a very kind of like Christian model in some ways. And maybe that's just because like those stories are more commonly told by Hollywood. And that's why I'm thinking that. And there is something about like film as opposed to like reading that I feel like has to have more of a perspective and a stake. And so I definitely wouldn't want this, like if I was teaching in a Sunday school context or something, which I've never done, so this is just pretend, but I wouldn't want to show this like as the way to teach the story. You know what I mean? Like I would want to show this and then teach students to analyze like what perspective is this person taking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that would be interesting. One thing that I think is always weird, no different in this case. This is a paid service, but I guess we watch for free. But there are ads. I've heard that critique too, is that people feel like this is part of like, I don't know. Christians, you hear this from Christians all the time, but they're like, Ramadan has just become too commercial.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot more complaints about this Ramadan than in past of like, I think it's because there are more like, you can buy Ramadan paper plates and like these products that are like very disposable and like cost money as opposed to like, there wasn't that option before. Yeah,
but I also think it's because, again, this being produced by Saudi, which a lot of people feel like has not really done, and myself included, has not done anything for Palestine. And this is like something that has captured a lot of Muslim people and kind of is provided, this is what people during iftar are just like getting around and watching, and it's this thing that's produced by Saudi, and it's taking people away from, I guess, a more meaningful spiritual reflection, or feeling like I guess people feel like they should be focusing elsewhere, and Saudi's just contributing to diverting people's attention away from worthwhile things.
I'm so of two minds about this. Because on the other hand, I'm like, if we weren't watching this, we'd probably be watching The West Wing. So I'm like, at least this is like more.
You and I, yeah.
Yeah. And like a lot of people, you know what I mean? So I'm like, okay, like, and I do think there's something to like, I mean, like the story is not about the prophet, right? It's only indirectly about the prophet. So I feel like it's not really a theological issue that, I mean, and even then there are like famous movies like The Messenger that like manage to tell the prophet's biography without showing the prophet. Like I don't think our early history is like off, and you're not saying this, but I know I've heard other critiques like this. I don't think that our early Islamic history is off limits. Like I think it's interesting to learn about the conflicts and stuff. Like I personally find that very interesting just because it kind of shows the humanness of it and the messiness of this kind of new movement playing out. But a lot of Muslims do feel kind of like we shouldn't delve into it. But there is something about the kind of like commodification of that story that does feel a little ick. At the same time,
the ads and
it's like
all
it's
this,
cheapening it, and it's also like, because it's Saudi specifically, I just do feel like it was such a kind of like middle finger that they chose this figure specifically. Yeah, like it definitely is like trying to throw their weight around and choose this figure who is like so this family really that is so hated by Shias. Yeah. And it's like, I mean, it doesn't mean that you don't get to talk about that story, but there is just something about it that like I can't quite articulate, that I'm a little bit like I'm still gonna watch it because I think it's interesting, but I don't know, like I don't think I find it spiritually beneficial. I will say though, it is actually helpful as like a timeline review for events and stuff, which I didn't really expect. Like for example, when I think about like early Muslim empire, it's always like in my head, I'm like, Prophet died, Rashidun, Umayyads, then the Abbasids. And I kind of forget that was such a short time period. Like I didn't realize that the first Umayyad caliph was actually a boy when the prophet was alive, that they overlapped in time. So like it's kind of helpful for stuff like that. And there's something about seeing it visually that definitely sticks with you differently than reading about it. Also like, yeah, I know that there were caravans obviously that went from the Arabian Peninsula to Damascus and, contemporary Syria. But it's kind of cool seeing like, oh, like, look, Syria is so green and lush. And like, there's something about that visual that I could see being helpful in like a teaching context. But yeah, I just think you have to be really careful that it's not the only narrative. And we live in such a visual culture and such a like film culture as opposed to a text culture that I could really see this becoming like an easy default. You know what I mean? Like if you just converted to Islam and you found this show, like this could be the way that you kind of indirectly learn about Syria and biography. And maybe that just means that we need more of these narratives. I don't know. More perspectives. But then because of the way money works, like what is it going to be? Like the Iran financed, film series versus the Saudi one?
One thing that I thought I started falling asleep like 3/4 of the way through just because I was tired. But just kind of back to that CGI stuff. There were a couple scenes and a couple of shots in there that I was like, if they could have just generated this with AI completely, I feel like they would have.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, like, how much of this is you can never know this, right, unless you really see the heart of like everyone who's like produced it and understand exactly how it was produced. But how much of this would they have produced by AI if they had the choice, and how much of like this project is about creating like something beautiful, like actually like, oh, this is a meaningful project that I like really want to mean something, like on an artistic level, not even just like as a spiritual endeavor.
I'd say those things are connected, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah. But like, oh, this also says something about who I am and what I think is beautiful, versus like, how do we put this in like a glossy, nice little package that we can market and, make appealing to people?
Yeah, I feel like it is more meant to just kind of like force one narrative out there.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it's meant to create a dominant narrative that will percolate. Like this is a weird comparison. And obviously everything has a profit motivation because we live in like a capitalist hellscape. But like the Muslim Matchmaker show, I feel like in a way was more earnest, even though that was like not theological. It was just about like lived experience with Muslims. Like there was an earnestness there that like I don't necessarily see in this production. I mean, maybe that's an unfair thing to say because you're right. Like I don't know people's motivations. Maybe the individual, like the director and the writer, felt earnest, but
yeah,
just because it is such a kind of like, and we've only seen one episode, so I'm open to this impression changing. But it is such a like hard hitting narrative of what is a very complicated and nuanced history.
Yeah,
it kind of feels like exclamation point, get this out there, and get it out there in the glossy, high production way and use the CGI in a way that is going to like stick in people's brains.
Yeah.
So having said that, like I didn't think that the portrayal of Muawiya was very nuanced because it was basically like, oh, he was always the good guy from day one. Even when he was a child, he realized what was up.
Yeah.
But I was surprised by the kind of empathy that was shown towards these people that were not accepting Islam. I mean, and we know because of history that they do eventually, like probably in the next episode.
Yeah.
But that was actually surprisingly nuanced, I thought. Like the kind of like wrestling that they felt. Like it wasn't like, these dummies, why aren't they getting on board? And I thought that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I feel like actually growing up when my grandma and my mom would tell me stories about the Quraysh and like all these idolaters, like, yeah, they were evil and they were just worshiping stones, and they deserve to be beheaded. It's like kind of, you get that vibe, is that they were like actually just evil people.
Well, Mama and Grandma don't mess around.
It wasn't, no, they wouldn't say that, but you get the sense that like, oh, these people are a stand-in for
all evil. Yeah.
Evil that develops out of ignorance.
Right. And the show did not have that perspective. Yeah. It definitely was more like, and it even showed like war is difficult on all sides,
Yeah.
It showed the Battle of Badr, which the Muslims won, and then it showed the Battle of Uhud, in which like the Muslims lost, and the protagonists that we're following at the moment like win. And it kind of like, you kind of get this sense of like, ultimately this is like a inter-tribal conflict, and that's hard for everyone. You know what I mean? Like cousins are fighting cousins, and even though we kind of know ultimately, because this is produced by Saudi and because it's meant for a Muslim audience, that like Islam is going to be ascendant, they still kind of capture that tension in the beginning, and you feel a lot more empathy for these characters that are kind of resisting conversion than I thought you would.
Now you get a nice little scene. I think it's with Abu Sufyan. He's at some market and he's looking through some swords.
Yeah, how are you feeling about that?
And I think I've identified the exact kind of dagger that I would like to have.
Wow, we got to bring you back.
It was a very long, it looked cool. It was a long dagger with like kind of like a curved end. I would like one of those. I think he was getting it for Heraclius.
Yeah, who I couldn't really follow who that was. Some Syrian guy. Or not Syrian, I guess Roman at the time. Yeah.
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 And the prophet had tried to, invite him to convert to Islam.
Right.
Yep. Which was a potential threat to, I guess, everyone else in the empire.
Or to the Quraysh that hadn't converted yet to Islam. We got to go to the year 629 CGI Saudi version and get you that. Was it a scimitar, like a really tiny one?
It wasn't a scimitar. It was just like a long dagger.
I thought you wanted a scimitar. This changed your perspective?
Yeah, I think so.
What
the
about it?
Scimitar is maybe too Ottoman.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Even though you were colonized by the Ottomans for like a bajillion years, and you're part Ottoman.
I don't remember that.
Okay. Your parents said that once. Have I said that on the podcast before? It was so funny.
I don't remember that.
I was like, I think you said something like you were like talking about Ottoman influence in Egypt, and they were like, "Oh, there wasn't much," and we were like, "Oh, how long was it again? How long was it? I don't remember." It was
like 400 years.
400 years.
Just a quick 400-year layover in Egypt.
And you're like, what? Like your great grandpa was Ottoman, right? Or was it your grandpa?
I don't know if he actually was. I think people called him the Turk, but I don't know if he was actually Turkish.
I'm guessing he was. That's my strong guess based on that title.
I don't know.
It makes sense that people would have intermarried. I think the Ottomans were not like so hands off, like,
Yeah.
It was more fluid kind of transition into what would become later on European colonialism.
I actually only recently, embarrassingly, found out that Muhammad Ali, the kind of like the father of modern Egypt, is what people consider him to be, was Armenian.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I remember you telling me that.
Which is
cool.
Devastating to find out.
Why is that devastating? Egypt is very multicultural. It always has been.
Sorry, Armenian? Was he Armenian or Albanian? I think he might have been Albanian.
I don't remember. It began with an A, though. You're right about that.
If it's Albanian, that's even more embarrassing.
Why? Because they're European. I guess so are Armenians.
I mean, let's see. Albanian. Oh my God.
Albanian. Wow.
That's tough.
I mean, I feel like a lot of your ancestors, because they're in Alexandria, are also probably like very Greek. And like y'all all have like, a lot of you have like blue eyes and stuff. So everyone's mixing.
I don't think so.
I think so.
I don't think so. Anyway. All right, let's keep going.
Okay. Let's see. Any other thoughts that I had? I think that's it. I'm still kind of struggling with the story of like, should Islamic history be told this way? I don't know. I think maybe not, but I think it is entertaining.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm spiritually opposed to it, but I am entertained.
Yeah. I think that's where I land.
Wow. I could see that the other way around, but it's hilarious to be like, yes, I think it's a moral wrong, but it's at least it's fun.
I think the Azhari guy was onto something with the fatwa. I feel like kind of mining these difficult moments in history and these really controversial figures for entertainment value is also kind of morally bad if there isn't like a lesson in that complexity. Mm-hmm. And what the show is doing is just like taking a side, so it's not really like a lesson.
Yeah, that's true,
but it's well produced and it's fun to watch. It's a good timeline review.
I guess if you take like the ultimate, it is kind of, I don't know why it's concerning, but to think about these stories that people tell as kind of to provide some level of like spiritual guidance, etc., for them to become like little more than Disney properties. You know what I'm saying?
But whenever I hear about the story of Moses, I think about that cartoon.
Yeah.
What's it called again?
The Prince of Egypt. Yeah,
great cartoon. So I mean, those things really do stick in your head.
But do you remember anything from the Prince of Egypt?
I remember,
other than the Pharaoh's evil.
I remember the little basket getting put in the water, and I was like, "There's a baby in there."
But did you learn anything from it?
I mean, I don't know, but I think I learned about Moses from that certainly way before I learned about Moses or Musa from the Quran or from any other source.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think the fact that it's serialized rather than just like a well-produced movie has a little something to do with it. Like it feels a little bit more like oh, this is just entertainment and filler.
But that's an old tradition for there to be like Ramadan serials. And also
how
I think
old can that tradition be?
It's as old as like we are, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a tradition I grew up with, but I know a lot of people did, especially in Egypt.
Right, but it's like relatively like not a long-running
TV's
tradition.
not even that old, so I guess
know, exactly.
in that way.
I know. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But I think also people have bad attention spans, so this is probably like just the most convenient way to get information to them. But yeah, I'm really torn. Like part of me, like I'm sort of going back and forth here now. I guess like it's not entirely new to like package stuff in an artistic way to teach it. And at the same time, I think it's just because it's Saudi produced that it feels kind of hollow. Maybe that's my own bias.
I mean, compared to like an oral tradition where, you know, some of these stories are told and each person who tells it has their own way of telling it and handing it down, and it's subject to maybe their own biases, which definitely happens. At least this is like, here's a narrative.
Right.
And everyone can kind of discuss that narrative.
Yeah.
And I think one of two things can happen. One is that, you know, because of state hegemony and how it's produced or whatever, people start to adopt that as like the narrative, which could be bad, depending on how it gets out there. It could also be that this is a way to discover and find out more nuance than people would otherwise have been able to, because they could say, oh, well, this is how I've been told this story, or, you know, it doesn't line up with X, Y, and Z, which is what I believe. But, you know, so maybe it's good that it's out there and people are discussing it and critiquing it and hearing critiques, hopefully, and being open-minded about it.
Yeah, it seems like most of the reviews are kind of just following along, like, predictably, like, lines of people's prior exposure to the story. Like, if you, like, are from a Sunni background and you are okay with entertainment versions of things, you're okay with it. If you're from a Shia background, you hate it. I think what you said about state hegemony is like really worrisome though. Like, again, I keep on thinking about converts, like who would come to the story without having maybe a prior take, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, even then, no one's a blank slate. It depends on the community that you convert into and whatever. And just the amount of money that Saudi has, it is like a little worrisome. But I guess it's a controversial enough figure that people will like quickly be exposed to other points of view. Mm-hmm. And hopefully not just kind of default to this kind of slightly sanitized one perspective narrative. I mean, I guess it kind of, if I'm being honest, it challenges some of my prior assumptions. I just always think of Muawiya as like straight up evil, as like a really terrible person. I mean, even though I had a pretty shoddy Islamic school or like any kind of Islamic education as a kid, that was definitely something that I was taught. Yeah. Just, I think, again, coming from a Shia perspective, that like the Umayyads were just absolutely evil. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of interesting. I guess, yeah. I am curious to keep on watching. I've heard that they depict, I think, Ali, but then they don't depict Aisha. So that's a little bit weird, too, that they're kind of picking Shia Sunni figures in terms of, like, who to show. It's interesting also, like, people always talk about how, like, Islam has such a strong prohibition against imagery, which is actually a lot more nuanced historically. Like, Iran, for example, has had a lot of, like, history, and so have some, like, different Muslim communities in China, or what is now China, of even depicting the prophet, or depicting the prophet with like his face, just kind of showing light and not his actual features. Having said that, there's definitely more distaste for iconography in a lot of Muslim cultures than there are in a lot of like Christian ones historically. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of funny that we're in this moment that like, I guess we're over that just because we live in such a like, I mean, they're still not showing the prophet obviously, but they are showing like a lot of people, which is interesting. I guess we live in just such a like image saturated world that we've kind of moved beyond that a bit.
But no prophets.
But I mean, if they're going to show,
that to me has always, I mean, growing up, that it's like that's been the line. Is like you don't depict prophets.
Any prophets, not just the prophet.
Right.
Interesting. But if they're going to show Ali, I mean, that's a pretty important. I guess from a Sunni perspective.
From a Sunni perspective,
it's not. It's okay, that's interesting. And not the prophet's wives is also kind of weird. But yeah, I guess you're right. It's holding that line with no prophets.
Although we did watch The Prince of Egypt.
Right. But we watched that because it was just a popular show in the US. I didn't watch that in like
a movie.
Yeah, popular movie. That's what I meant. But it's not like you didn't watch that in Sunday school or anything, right? Neither did I. It was just like on TV.
No, but I think my parents watched it.
So they were okay with Moses being shown there.
I don't know. Maybe they didn't know it was about Moses.
I'm sure they did. I feel like I think the real discomfort is with showing the Prophet Muhammad. I don't think there's as much discomfort for showing other prophets. But you're right. It's not common.
I feel like I remember having books that had illustrations, but like you never saw
their faces. That's fair. Yeah.
Could be a false memory. Who knows?
No, I think you're probably right.
Yeah. Okay. What else about the show?
I think that's all I had, really. I'm intrigued.
You gonna give it a rating out of 10 for just the first episode?
Yeah. What are we rating based off of? I feel like that's tricky. It has to be a one comprehensive rating, or can I qualify it? I would say
one comprehensive rating, and it has, you can do your little algorithmic plus minus for spiritual value
versus entertainment.
And
I would say 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10.
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna land like 6.5 out of 10.
All right. Similar place.
Yeah.
Do you want to watch more?
I'll watch more. Yeah.
But like, is it because of the controversy, or do you feel like the show in of itself is enough that you would want to watch more? Like, it's interesting enough?
For me, I want to watch more because it's a different dialect of Arabic than I'm used to hearing.
I think it's like classical.
Yeah.
It's actually easier for me to understand than like Egyptian stuff.
Really? Yeah. So I just from like a
learning more
Arabic perspective.
We got to get a Shahid subscription.
Yeah. So I actually don't need to just watch this show for that. I guess we can just get a subscription. Well,
I think this show specifically is like in classical. I don't know if all the shows on this channel are. Yeah.
Probably a few. I don't know. Yeah. I'd be down to watch more.
What I really want to see is the battle between Ali on one side and Aisha and Muawiya on the other. I'm very curious how they depict that.
Yeah. Anything else?
No. Hope everyone is hanging in there.
Yes. Me too. All right. Bye.
Bye.